Dust, stars, and the space between us. A lonely cowboy rancher meets a mysterious, handsome stranger, emotional cowboy secret love story. The morning Eli Calloway found the stranger on his land, the sky was still the color of a bruise. He almost didn't stop. That was the thing that kept him up nights afterward, the thought that he had almost kept riding, almost let the gray pre-dawn light swallow that still crumpled shape near the eastern fence line without a second glance. He had places to be, cattle to check, a ranch that didn't run itself and hadn't, not since his father passed 14 months ago and left him the whole weight of Calloway Creek on his 26-year-old shoulders. He didn't have time for strange shapes in the early dark. But his horse, Ranger, a stubborn gray quarter horse who had opinions about everything and shared them freely, had stopped of his own accord, planted his hooves in the dry grass and refused to move another inch forward, ears pricked toward the fence line like he was hearing something Eli couldn't. "What?" Eli had muttered, reining him in, squinting through the half-dark. And then the shape moved. Just barely, a shift of shoulders, a slow, pained uncurling like something waking up that wasn't entirely sure it wanted to. Eli had his hand on the rifle strapped to his saddle before his brain caught up with his instincts, but then the figure turned and the pale gray light caught a face, young, sharp-jawed, dark-haired, and wearing an expression of pure, unguarded agony. Not the face of a threat. The face of someone in trouble. Eli was off Ranger before he'd made the conscious decision to dismount. His boots hit the dry Texas earth and he was moving, crossing the 20 yards of open pasture in long, unhurried strides the way his father had taught him, deliberate, not panicked, because panicking never helped anything and usually made it worse. "Hey," he called when he was close enough. "Hey, you all right?" A stupid question. The man was clearly not all right. He was half-propped against one of Eli's cedar fence posts, one hand braced against the wood like it was the only solid thing in the world, his dark jacket torn at the shoulder and caked with what looked in the growing light like dried mud and something darker. His breathing was audible even from 10 feet away, shallow, careful, the breathing of someone managing pain with conscious effort. He looked up at Eli's voice, and even through the strain and the exhaustion and the early morning confusion, his eyes were remarkable. Dark brown, almost black, framed by thick lashes, and carrying in them a depth and a wariness and a kind of guarded intelligence that hit Eli somewhere in the chest before he was ready for it. "I'm fine," the stranger said. His voice was low and rough, probably from the cold, and the words came out with the particular flatness of someone who has said them so many times they've stopped believing them entirely. "Sure you are," Eli said, crouching down to his level. Up close, the damage was more apparent. A gash along his left temple, dried now but not old, scrapes on his forearms where the jacket was torn, and the way he was holding his right side, that careful, minimal breathing suggested ribs at best, something worse at worst. "How long have you been out here?" The stranger's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter." "Humor, mate." A pause. Those dark eyes moved over Eli's face with the slow, assessing quality of someone who has learned that trusting strangers is something you do carefully or not at all. Whatever he found in Eli's expression seemed to settle something, though. The tension in his shoulders dropped fractionally. "Since about midnight," he admitted. Eli looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked back to Ranger, unhooked the canteen from the saddle and came back and held it out without a word. The stranger stared at it for a second like he wasn't sure what to do with an uncomplicated kindness. Then he took it, and Eli watched his throat move as he drank long, grateful swallows, and something about the sight of it, that raw, unguarded relief, made Eli look away at the horizon where the sun was just beginning to think about showing up. "Noah," the stranger said when he lowered the canteen. Eli glanced back. "What?" "My name, Noah West." He held the canteen out, "in case you wanted to know whose life you might be saving." Eli took the canteen back, and for the first time since he'd ridden out that morning, something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one crossed his face. "Eli Calloway, and I'm not saving anybody's life, I'm just deciding whether to call an ambulance or a sheriff." Noah's expression shifted at that, not fear exactly but something close to it. A careful blankness that dropped over his features like a curtain being drawn. "Neither," he said quietly, "please." Eli studied him. The light was better now, the sky going from bruised purple to a washed-out gold, and he could see the details more clearly, the quality of exhaustion in Noah's face that went past one bad night, the way his eyes tracked their surroundings with a habitual alertness that spoke of long practice. He was young, 23, 24 maybe, dark hair that fell across his forehead. A jaw that would have been considered handsome under better circumstances and was still, somehow, stubbornly striking despite the dirt and the dried blood and the evidence of a very hard night. "All right," Eli said finally, "then can you ride?" Noah blinked. "On a horse?" "No, on a bicycle, yes, on a horse, mine's right there." He jerked his chin toward Ranger, who had followed him over and was now investigating Noah with great interest, nose lowered, huffing gently at his hair. "He's gentle before you ask." Noah looked at Ranger, Ranger looked at Noah. Some kind of assessment passed between them. "I can ride," Noah said. Getting him up was harder than either of them made it look, because the ribs were definitely the issue and every shift of his torso sent a visible ripple of pain across Noah's features. But he made no sound, not one, and Eli found himself noticing that the way he held the pain privately contained it, refused to let it out. When he was finally settled in the saddle, pale and breathing with the kind of careful precision that suggested he was counting each inhale, Eli took Ranger's reins and started walking. The ranch house was a mile and a half away across open pasture. It was the longest mile and a half Eli had walked in recent memory. They didn't talk much. Eli asked once if Noah needed to stop and got a flat no that he believed about 40%, but the man stayed upright and conscious, and by the time the ranch house came into view, low and sprawling and stone, built by Eli's grandfather with a solidity that defied the years, some of the terrible tightness in Eli's chest eased. He didn't examine why it had been there in the first place. He got Noah inside, got him onto the old couch in the living room, got the first aid kit from under the kitchen sink. He cleaned the gash at his temple with antiseptic and butterfly bandages, working with the quiet efficiency of someone who has been patching up cuts and scrapes on himself and ranch hands for years with no one else to call on. Noah sat still through all of it, watching him with those dark, too attentive eyes, and said nothing. "The ribs," Eli said when he was done with the temple. "I can't do much about those except wrap them. You should probably have an x-ray." "I've had cracked ribs before," Noah said. "I know how they feel. These aren't cracked, just bruised." "You sound very confident for someone who spent the night on the ground." "I'm a confident person." Eli looked at him, Noah looked back, and something in his expression was the faintest, most shadowed ghost of humor there and gone so fast Eli almost missed it. Almost. "Shirt off," Eli said, and turned to get the elastic bandage from the kit. The silence that followed was about 2 seconds longer than it needed to be. "Sure," Noah said, and Eli heard the careful shift of fabric, the controlled quiet of a man moving through pain without commenting on it. He turned back, and whatever he'd been about to say left him without a forwarding address. Noah West, it turned out, was not just abstractly handsome. He was, Eli's brain supplied the word before he could stop it, and then he spent the next half-second being annoyed at his own brain, beautiful. Strong-shouldered and lean, with the kind of build that spoke of physical work rather than a gym, dark hair curling slightly at the nape of his neck. And across his torso, the evidence of a life that had not been easy, the yellowing bruise along his side that was the current complaint, yes, but also older marks, old scars. The kind that a person accumulates not from accidents but from a world that has consistently been harder on them than it had any right to be. Eli wrapped the ribs without comment. His hands were steady, he was proud of that. "Thank you," Noah said when he was done, quiet and direct with none of the performative gratitude that Eli always found exhausting, just 2 words that meant what they said. "Don't thank me yet," Eli said, putting the kit away. "I'm going to make you drink water and eat something, and then you're going to tell me what happened." Noah was quiet for a moment. "And if I don't want to?" Eli turned to look at him from across the room. "Then you don't, but you're still going to drink the water." He made eggs and toast, which was about the extent of his morning cooking ambition, and Noah ate with the quiet, focused attention of someone who hasn't had a full meal in longer than they're admitting. Eli drank his coffee and watched the ranch through the kitchen window, the familiar geometry of fence lines and outbuildings, the slow morning movement of cattle in the near pasture, and didn't push. He'd learned, over years of quiet mornings and his father's long silences, that stories come out in their own time. Pushing only made people fold inward. "I was hitching," Noah said eventually, "from Amarillo, caught a ride with a man who turned out to have more intentions than I'd accounted for." A pause, the edge of his fork traced an absent pattern on the plate. "I got out, the getting out was the problem." "Moving vehicle?" Eli asked neutrally. Slowing down maybe 15 miles an hour. Another pause, I've done worse. Eli absorbed this, processed the implications, the torn jacket, the gash, the bruised ribs, the careful distance in Noah's eyes when Eli had mentioned calling anyone official. Where were you headed? Nowhere specific, he said it without embarrassment, like it was simply a fact about his life. South, somewhere warm. You're in Texas, it gets warm. I noticed the ghost of that almost smile again. I think I noticed it from the ground at midnight. Eli found himself looking at the man across his kitchen table, this stranger who had appeared on his land like something the dark had left behind, and feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time, something that he identified after a careful internal assessment as interest, not pity, not the distant practical concern of a neighbor doing the decent thing, actual personal human interest in who this person was. He looked down at his coffee. You can stay, he said, few days until you're steady. Noah looked up from his plate. His expression was careful and still, the way still water is just before something breaks the surface. I don't take charity, he said. Good, because I'm not offering it. I have a ranch and not enough hands, 40 head of cattle, 3 horses, a truck that needs new brake lines, and about 600 feet of fence that needs replacing before next spring. He met Noah's eyes, straight and level. You work, you eat and sleep here, simple. Noah held his gaze for a moment. That assessing quality again, that careful measuring of something, maybe the offer, maybe the man making it, maybe the distance between what he was used to and what was being held out in front of him. All right, he said finally. Eli nodded, put his mug in the sink. Get some sleep first, the cattle aren't going anywhere. He left Noah on the couch with a blanket his mother had made 20 years ago, blue and brown squares, worn soft with time, and went back out to do his morning rounds. Ranger walked him through the familiar loops, past the water troughs and the near pasture and the dry creek bed, and Eli kept his eyes on the distance and tried not to think about the man sleeping in his living room. Tried and failed with an efficiency that he found privately concerning. Noah stayed. Not just the few days that Eli had offered as a kind of temporary mercy, but past them, settling into the rhythms of the ranch with a naturalness that surprised Eli more than he wanted to admit. He was a good worker, better than good actually. He had the kind of practical competence with tools and animals and physical labor that only comes from long experience, and he worked with a quiet, focused energy that Eli recognized, because it was the same energy he brought to work himself. Head down, one thing at a time, no drama. The cattle liked him, which Eli took as a genuine character reference because cattle were, in his experience, better judges of character than most people gave them credit for. Ranger, who was famously selective in his affections, had taken to following Noah around the paddock with an air of devoted attention that bordered on embarrassing. He's done that to exactly one person before, Eli said one evening, leaning on the paddock fence watching Ranger trail Noah like a large, devoted shadow while Noah replaced a post with unhurried precision. Who? Noah asked, not looking up from his work. My dad. A beat of silence. Noah's hands kept moving, steady and sure, but something in the set of his shoulders changed. Was he a good man? Yeah, Eli said, he was. Noah nodded slowly. Didn't offer condolences, didn't ask when or how, didn't fill the space with the well-meaning platitudes that Eli had been drowning in for the past 14 months. Just acknowledged the fact of it with that small, quiet nod and went back to work. Eli stood at the fence for another few minutes after that, watching the light go gold across the pasture, and thought that he couldn't remember the last time someone's silence had felt like such a gift. They established a routine without discussing it. Eli was up first, he always was, had been waking before dawn since he was 10 years old, some internal alarm that had never been reset, and by the time Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway, rumpled and squinting against the light, coffee was already made and Eli was halfway through his first cup. Noah made eggs most mornings because, as he explained once in the flat way he stated most things, he was better at eggs than Eli was and there was no point in pretending otherwise. He was right, Eli's eggs were mediocre, he accepted this. In the evenings they ate dinner at the kitchen table and gradually, slowly, without fanfare the dinners lengthened. A question asked, an answer given, another question. The careful, incremental building of something that Eli didn't have a precise name for yet, some structure of mutual knowledge that rose between them word by quiet word. He learned that Noah had grown up in New Mexico, that his mother had died when he was 16, That he'd been moving since he was 18, working here and there, following work and weather and whatever internal compass pointed him toward the next place. That he read anything he could get his hands on and had a particular weakness for histories of the American West, which Eli found secretly amusing and tried not to show. "You're living in the American West," he pointed out one evening. "I know." Noah turned the page of the book he'd found on Eli's shelf, a battered history of Texas cattle trails, without looking up. "That's not ironic, that's just correct. What do you like about it?" Noah considered the question with the seriousness he brought to most things. "The scale of it," he said finally. "The size of the ambition. These men moved entire economies across open land with nothing but horses and stubbornness. That's worth reading about." Eli thought about his grandfather who had done something like exactly that. "Yeah," he said, "I guess it is." Noah looked up then and found Eli looking at him, and for a moment the kitchen was very quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, something moved through the dark, wind in the grass probably, or one of the horses shifting. Noah's expression was unreadable in the warm lamplight, all shadows in those steady dark eyes, and Eli felt something move through him that he had no language for, something that started in his chest and radiated outward like the warmth from a fire. He looked back down at his own book. "You never talk about yourself," Noah said after a moment. Eli's eyebrows went up. "I talk. You answer questions, that's not the same thing." Eli thought about arguing this and decided it was too accurate to be worth the trouble. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." Noah's voice was even unhurried the way it usually was, no pressure. So Eli told him about the ranch, about growing up on it, learning it the way you learn a language, not from books but from immersion, from doing and failing and doing again. About his father, who had been a man of deep silences and deep loves and had communicated both primarily through action. About his mother, who had left when Eli was 9 and about whom he had made a careful peace. Over the years, with the complicated truth that some people just aren't built for the life they find themselves in. About the past 14 months, the grief that had come in waves, unexpected and indifferent to his schedule, the particular loneliness of being responsible for something enormous with no one to share the weight of it. He stopped talking at some point and realized he'd been talking for a long time, longer than he had talked to anyone in months. Noah was watching him with an expression that wasn't pity. Eli had become very good at identifying pity, had developed a neuralgic response to it in the past year, but was something else. Something more careful and more genuine. Attention, maybe. The specific quality of attention that means someone is not just hearing your words but following the shape of your meaning. "You've been doing this alone," Noah said, not a question. "Yeah," Eli turned his coffee mug in his hands. "It's my ranch." "That's not what I meant." Eli was quiet for a moment, then, "I know what you meant." The clock ticked, the wind moved outside. Eli's heart was doing something he was choosing for the time being not to examine. "I should check the north water trough before bed," he said, standing up. "Gage was reading low this afternoon." "I'll come," Noah said, rising without hesitation. They walked out into the Texas dark together, the sky above them absolute and extravagant with stars, the way it gets out here far from any city, a kind of celestial excess, and neither of them said anything, and somehow the silence felt less lonely than it had in a very long time. There was a morning, about 6 weeks in, when Eli came back from the south pasture to find Noah in the barn, standing at Ranger's stall and talking to the horse in a low, continuous murmur. Ranger had his nose over the stall gate and his eyes half closed in an expression of pure, embarrassing bliss. Eli stopped in the barn doorway and watched. He couldn't make out the words, just the tone of them, low and warm and private, the kind of voice a person uses when they think no one is listening. Noah's hand moved slowly along Ranger's jaw and the horse leaned into it, and Noah's expression in profile was soft in a way that Eli had not seen on his face before, unguarded, easy, like whatever walls the man carried with him everywhere had, just for this moment, come down. Something happened to Eli's breathing. He must have made some small sound or shifted his weight on the barn floor because Noah turned, and the softness didn't disappear exactly, but it gathered itself back up, became more contained, and those dark eyes found Eli in the doorway with a look that was slightly surprised and slightly something else. "Morning," Noah said. "Morning." Eli walked in like he'd been planning to all along, went to the feed bins, measured out the morning rations. His hands knew this work so well they could do it without his brain's involvement, which was useful because his brain was currently occupied. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," Noah said it simply, without elaboration, in the way he said most things. Ribs still bothering you? A pause, not really. Eli glanced over. Noah was leaning against the stall now, arms crossed loosely, watching him work with that particular quality of attention that Eli had gotten used to and still hadn't figured out entirely what to do with. It was the kind of attention that made you aware of yourself from the outside. "What keeps you up then?" Eli asked, and then heard how that sounded and added more casually, "if you want to say." Another pause, longer this time. "Thinking too much, mostly." Noah's voice was neutral, but there was something beneath the neutrality, some texture that Eli could feel more than hear. "I do that sometimes." "About what?" "Things I want, things I shouldn't." He said it so quietly, so matter-of-factly that for a moment Eli wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. But then he turned and looked at Noah, and Noah was looking back at him, and the air between them had a quality to it, a density, a tension like the air before lightning, that made Eli's heart beat three separate, distinct, very noticeable beats before he could get it back under control. Then Noah looked away, back at Ranger, and the moment passed like a cloud shadow moving across the land, here and gone. "You want coffee?" Eli said. "Yeah," Noah said, "thanks." They had coffee. They talked about the fence lines and the weather forecast and the truck's brake lines, which were definitely needing attention before Eli drove it to town next week. They did not talk about the barn doorway or the 2 seconds of eye contact or the air pressure or any of the other things that Eli's brain was filing away into a folder labeled "Do Not Examine Too Closely." But the folder was getting full. The thing about working closely with someone on a ranch was that proximity was unavoidable. It was just the nature of the work, 2 people and a few hundred acres, and a list of tasks that required coordination and cooperation and frequently physical closeness. Eli had worked with ranch hands before. He knew how to be near someone, how to hand off a tool and brush past in a narrow space and work a fence line side by side without it meaning anything. But Noah was not exactly like ranch hands before. There was the afternoon they spent restringing barbed wire along the eastern fence, the two of them moving in a practiced rhythm that they'd developed over weeks without discussing it, and Noah leaned across to grab the wire stretcher from Eli's side, and Eli caught his wrist to guide it clear of a sharp end, and Noah's head turned at the contact, just slightly. And Eli was suddenly very aware of the warmth of his wrist under his hand and the smell of sun-warmed cotton and the particular quality of stillness that came over Noah when they were that close. He let go sharp end, he said, and pointed. "I see it," Noah said, and there was something slightly rough in his voice that hadn't been there before. "Thanks." They went back to work. There was the evening they both ended up in the kitchen at the same time, reaching for the same cabinet, and turned to each other in the narrow space between counter and table with about 6 inches of air between them, and for a suspended, impossible second neither of them moved. Noah's eyes moved just once, just briefly, just enough to notice, and Eli's heart lodged itself somewhere in the vicinity of his throat and didn't come down for several seconds after Noah stepped back and said, "Go ahead," with a calm that Eli found both impressive and faintly maddening. There was the storm 3 weeks into Noah's stay that blew in from the west with the particular ferocity of a Texas spring storm and took out the power just after dark. They'd been sitting in the living room, Noah with his book, Eli doing nothing, which was a luxury he allowed himself approximately never, and the lights went and the wind came and Eli got up to get the oil lamp from the sideboard, moving in the dark from memory, and when he turned back with the lit lamp in his hand, Noah was closer than he'd expected. Had stood up, probably to help. The lamplight caught the angles of his face from below and made something of them that Eli's chest did not respond to calmly. "Got it," Eli said. His voice was steady, he was proud of that. "I see that." Noah didn't move. In the storm dark and the lamplight, his expression was something that Eli couldn't name, couldn't categorize, couldn't safely examine for the amount of space he had available. Outside, the thunder came, the lamp flame dipped and held. "Should check the horses," Eli said. "Right." They put on their coats and went out into the storm together. The wind was loud and wild and made talking difficult, which Eli found, under the circumstances, something of a relief. He had a conversation with himself late one night that was overdue. It happened the way these conversations usually did, lying in the dark, one arm behind his head, looking at the ceiling while the house settled around him and the clock ticked down the hall. It was the kind of honesty that only works in the dark, when there's no one to perform anything for and no practical advantage to pretending. He thought about Noah. He thought about the way his brain moved toward Noah, the way water moves toward the lowest point, not with any conscious effort, just with the quiet inevitability of following the nature of things. He thought about how the day felt different on the days they worked separately, how there was something particular about the moment Noah came into whatever room Eli was in, how he'd started noticing small things, the way Noah pushed his hair back when he was thinking hard, the way he laughed, which was rare and honest and usually surprised out of him rather than offered. The specific quality of his attention when he was interested in something. He thought about the barn and the kitchen and the storm. He thought, I know what this is. He'd known in some quiet, largely ignored corner of himself for a long time. Not just since Noah but before, running a thread back through his life to moments he'd filed away without examining, conversations he'd deflected with practiced skill, a whole architecture of not quite looking that he'd built so gradually he'd almost stopped seeing it for what it was. He wasn't afraid of it exactly, that surprised him a little. He was afraid of something else, something more specific and more immediate and harder to name. The particular terror of wanting something from someone specific, someone who had appeared on his land wounded and weary and was currently sleeping 20 feet down the hall, someone whose past was a collection of careful omissions and whose future was the word, somewhere south, and who had, as far as Eli could tell, no particular reason to stay. He turned over, put his face in the pillow, and decided this was a problem for the daylight. He did not sleep easily. The problem arrived in a truck. 3 months into Noah's time at Callaway Creek, on a Tuesday morning in early April when the bluebonnets were rioting along the roadsides and the air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet, a truck Eli didn't recognize turned into the ranch drive. He was on the porch drinking his second coffee, watching it come up the long dirt road with the familiar, calibrated wariness of a man who owns something worth protecting. The driver was someone Eli didn't know, tall, broad-shouldered, good-looking in an obvious way, with easy confidence in the way he climbed down from the cab and pushed his sunglasses up. Late 20s maybe. He looked around the ranch with the comfortable appraisal of someone who was used to arriving places and being welcome. Then he saw Noah, who had emerged from the barn. Noah, his voice was warm and loud and carried across the yard. He crossed toward him with his arms already opening. Man, I've been looking everywhere for you. Noah had gone still, not the dangerous stillness of someone expecting a threat, but something else, something more complicated, something with more layers. He let the man embrace him, returned it after a brief hesitation, and Eli watched from the porch and felt the specific, unpleasant sensation of something with sharp edges moving through his chest. Marcus, Noah said when they pulled apart, how did you find me? Bartender in Refugio said he'd seen you working a ranch out this way, took a few wrong turns. Marcus grinned. He had the kind of grin that expected to be found charming. You're hard to track down when you want to be. I know, Noah said, and there was something guarded in it, something that didn't quite match the warmth that Marcus was projecting into the space between them. Eli came down off the porch because leaving Noah to deal with something that had shown up on his land wasn't in his nature. Eli Callaway, he said when he reached them, extending a hand. Marcus Ray's, the handshake was firm and uncomplicated. Good ranch, nice setup. Thanks, Eli looked at Noah, friend of yours. A beat, old friend, Noah said. The words were chosen carefully, which told Eli something. We grew up in the same town, Marcus supplied with the ease of someone who doesn't edit themselves. Before he took off and turned into a wandering mystery. He said it like a joke, but there was something under it, something that knew it wasn't entirely a joke. They had lunch because that was what you did. Eli made it because it was his kitchen, and Marcus sat at the table and talked easily and confidently about himself, where he'd been, what he was doing, where he was headed, and Noah sat across from him and said less than usual, which was already not much. Eli listened to Marcus talk and watched Noah not talk and felt that sharp-edged thing moving through him again, more persistently. After lunch, Marcus asked if he could talk to Noah alone. He said it politely enough, looked at Eli and asked if he minded, and Eli said no, of course not, and took himself out to the barn and spent 20 minutes doing things that didn't strictly need doing. He could see them from the barn doorway in the yard. He wasn't trying to watch them, but the yard was in his sight lane and he had to be somewhere. Marcus was doing most of the talking. Noah was listening with his arms crossed and his head slightly bowed, the posture of someone receiving information they're not sure how to respond to. At one point Marcus reached out and put a hand on Noah's shoulder, and Noah didn't pull away, but something in his posture sharpened, became slightly less receptive. Then Noah looked up and across the yard, directly at the barn. Directly at Eli. It might have been coincidence, it might have been that he just looked in that direction. But their eyes met through the distance and the bright April afternoon, and Eli felt the contact of it like something physical. Then Marcus said something and Noah looked back at him, and Eli turned away and found something else to do that involved his back to the yard. When he came back to the house, Marcus was leaning on his truck and Noah was standing 10 feet away with a particular kind of distance between them that wasn't just physical. "I should get going," Marcus said when Eli appeared. He didn't look like a man who had gotten what he came for. "Long drive," he looked at Noah. "Think about it." "I will," Noah said, noncommittal, careful. Marcus nodded, looked at Eli with an expression that was assessing in a way Eli didn't particularly appreciate, and then got in his truck and drove away. The truck went down the long dirt road toward the highway. They stood in the yard and watched it go. The bluebonnets moved in the light wind along the fence line. "You don't have to tell me," Eli said. "He wants me to come back," Noah said. "There's a job in New Mexico." A pause. He stopped. "Also what?" A longer pause. Noah's profile was still and precise in the afternoon light, the line of his jaw, the shadow under his cheekbones. "Someone I used to be with," he said quietly, "before." Eli absorbed this information with what he felt was admirable external calm. "Right," he said. "It ended a long time ago, not well." Noah turned to look at him then, and his expression was carrying something direct and deliberate, like he was making sure a particular message was received. "I don't want to go back. I'm not going to." Eli held his gaze. "Okay," he said. "I just wanted to tell you that." "Okay," Eli said again, and then looked at the fence line because he had run out of things to do with his face. That evening was quiet. They ate dinner and cleaned up, and Eli played something low on the old record player in the living room, something his father had liked, and Noah sat in the chair by the window reading his book, and it could have been any evening, except that neither of them was reading or listening to the music. They were both sitting in the particular awareness of something that had shifted, some new element introduced into the space between them that changed the temperature of it. Before he went to bed, Noah paused in the living room doorway. "Eli." He looked up. "Yeah." Noah opened his mouth, closed it, then seemed to decide against whatever he'd been about to say. "Good night," he said. "Good night." Long after Noah had gone to bed, Eli sat in the living room with the record player turning silently. He'd let it reach the end of the record and hadn't gotten up to flip it, and thought about the way Noah had looked across the yard at the barn. The specific quality of that look, the decision in it. He was not a man who fooled himself as a general policy. He was not going to start now. Something changed after Marcus came. Eli noticed it in the way you notice weather shifting, the temperature dropping a few degrees, the light going flat, something in the air that tells you a front is coming before you can see it. Noah was still there, still working, still eating dinner at the table, still giving Ranger the kind of devoted attention that the horse returned with undignified enthusiasm. But there was something different in the edges of him, something more careful, more contained. He smiled less, which hadn't been much to begin with, but now was almost nothing. He volunteered less at dinner, took up his book earlier, retired to the small bedroom earlier than usual, and didn't always say goodnight. And he had started, Eli noticed with a careful, quiet hurt that he was trying hard to categorize as something else, putting distance between them in the physical space. Standing a little farther away when they worked, being already around the corner when Eli came into a room. Stepping back from the kitchen cabinet before Eli got there. It was precise and practiced and probably, Eli reflected, not even entirely conscious. The way someone who's learned that getting close to things hurts will sometimes pull back before they even know why. Eli let it happen. He was not going to be the kind of man who pursued someone who was pulling away. He was not going to make Noah uncomfortable on his own ranch, on the place where Noah slept and worked and had started. Eli had thought to feel something like safe. If Noah needed distance, then distance was what he'd get. But it hurt, in the quiet, particular way that things hurt when you've let yourself want something specific and the specific thing starts to recede. He mentioned it to no one because there was no one to mention it to. This was the other side of the coin that he'd been trying not to look at for the past year, the isolation that was built into the life he'd been left. His nearest neighbor was 8 miles away. His friends from before, from the brief, strange period after school when he'd tried living closer to a city, had drifted back to their own lives. He had the ranch and the animals and the work, and he had Noah, and the prospect of what the ranch felt like before Noah was something he didn't particularly want to think about. He went about his business. He did the work. He checked the cattle and repaired the fence and drove to town for supplies and came back to the ranch and made dinner and went to bed. He was profoundly good at functioning. It was maybe the thing he was best at. One evening, about 2 weeks after Marcus's visit, he was in the barn later than usual, fixing a gate hinge that had been giving him trouble when he heard footsteps behind him. He'd thought Noah was in the house. He didn't turn around. "You've been avoiding me," Noah said. Eli kept his hands on the hinge. "I've been giving you space." "I didn't ask for space." "You seemed like you wanted it." A silence, then I seemed like I was scared. The words came out rough, like they'd been held in for a while and had scraped on the way out. "That's not the same thing." Eli put down the wrench, turned around. Noah was standing in the barn doorway, hands in his jacket pockets, the barn light picking up the angles of his face. He looked tired, not just tonight tired but deep tired, the kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long without putting it down. "Scared of what?" Eli asked. "You know what?" Quiet, direct. Eli's heart was doing that thing again. He stood his ground because it was his barn and his ground and waited. "I don't want to mess this up," Noah said. He pulled one hand out of his pocket and pushed his hair back, the gesture that Eli knew meant he was working through something hard. "This," he gestured around the barn, the ranch, the general vicinity of the life Eli had built. "Whatever this is, I don't have." A pause, he tried again. "I've been leaving places my whole life, sometimes because I had to and sometimes because I didn't know how to stay, and I don't want to do that here. I don't want to do something that makes it so I can't stay." Eli thought carefully about his next words for a moment. "What makes you think it would do that?" he asked. Noah looked at him. Those dark, careful eyes, the wariness in them that was older than his years, and underneath the wariness something else, something hopeful and terrified in equal measure. "Because I've never been lucky," Noah said simply, "not about things that matter." Eli crossed the barn, not fast, nothing he did was fast, he wasn't built that way, but deliberate. He crossed the barn and he stopped in front of Noah, close but not in the 6-inch kitchen cabinet territory, and looked at him straight. "Noah," he said, "I've been running this ranch alone for 14 months and I've been in this part of Texas my whole life and I know every person within 50 miles and I am telling you, as someone who has had ample time to develop very specific opinions on the subject, that luck doesn't live out here." He paused. "But things that last do, things that are built." He held Noah's gaze. "I'm not scared of building something." Noah stared at him. The barn was very quiet, just the horses breathing, a cricket somewhere, the settling sounds of old wood. "You're telling me to stop running," Noah said. "I'm telling you that you don't have to. A difference. There's nothing out here chasing you." Something moved across Noah's face. Not a smile, not quite. Something that preceded a smile, something that was the weather system that a smile comes from. "You're not exactly a low-stakes thing," Noah said, and there was something raw in it, something that was honesty stripped down to its studs. "No," Eli agreed, "I'm not." They stood there in the barn with all of that between them, and Eli let it sit there because he had learned from long practice that you don't rush things that need time to take root. You make space for them, you show up consistently in the space you've made, and you wait. "Okay," Noah said finally. "Okay," Eli said. He went back to the gate hinge. Noah leaned against the stall and handed him tools when he needed them, and they worked in the warm dark of the barn while the night moved outside, and when they walked back to the house together the distance was gone. Not dramatically, there was no dramatic gesture, no sudden transformation. It was just gone, the way tension releases from a piece of wire when the right adjustment is made. And in its place was the particular warmth of two people walking next to each other in the dark because they want to. Spring turned to summer the way it does in Texas, abruptly, emphatically, with no pretense of transition, and Callaway Creek turned golden and dry and blazing with heat that settled over the land by 10 in the morning and didn't lift until well after dark. They adapted. Earlier mornings, the hardest work done before noon, long midday breaks in the relative cool of the house or the barn. Evenings stretched long and drowsy, the sun taking forever to go down, the land cooling in slow increments while the sky put on its nightly extravagance of color. Eli bought a second set of porch chairs. He didn't make a thing of it, just set them both out there one evening, but Noah noticed, and something about the noticing, the specific quiet way Noah settled into the new chair like he'd been sitting in it for years, landed somewhere in Eli's chest and stayed. They talked more those summer evenings. Really talked, the kind of conversation that has depth to it, that covers ground, that moves between the practical and the philosophical, and the personal with the easy range of two people who have figured out how to trust each other. Noah talked about his childhood in New Mexico with a frankness that told Eli he'd made a decision somewhere along the way to stop holding it at arm's length. The mother who'd died too young, the father who'd been present in body and absent everywhere else. The feeling of being 17 years old and understanding for the first time that nobody was coming to save you and you were going to have to be the thing that saved yourself. Eli listened and didn't rush him and refilled their glasses and watched the stars come out over the pasture. "When did you stop being angry about it?" Eli asked one night. Noah considered this for a long time. "I haven't entirely," he said, "but I'm less interested in the anger than I used to be." He turned his glass in his hands. "Anger's expensive, it costs more than the thing that caused it after a while." Eli nodded slowly, thought about his mother, about the careful accommodation he'd made with the fact of her leaving, thought about his father's absence, which was a different kind of wound but equally real. "Yeah," he said, "I know what you mean." Noah looked at him. In the long summer evening, the light was going amber and low, casting everything in warmth, and his face was soft in a way that Eli was now more familiar with, the way it went when the walls came down. "You're good, Eli," Noah said, not like a compliment exactly, more like a statement of observed fact. "I don't mean that as I just mean it, you're a good person. I don't say that about many people." Eli felt heat in his face that wasn't from the summer. "You're embarrassing me," he said. "I'm being honest. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Noah smiled. It was the real one, the rare, unguarded one that arrived when he was caught off guard by something good. It rearranged his whole face, softened the sharp angles, put something lit and warm into his eyes that was, in Eli's private and carefully guarded opinion, the most beautiful thing he'd seen in recent memory. He looked back at the stars. "I haven't been happy in a long time," Noah said after a while, quietly factual. "Before this." A pause. "I wanted you to know that." Eli's hands tightened on his glass. "I'm glad," he said, and put everything he had into keeping his voice steady. There was a day in late June when they drove out to the far north pasture to check on a stretch of fence that Eli suspected was failing. The cattle had been drifting in ways that suggested a gap somewhere, and they didn't find the gap until mid-afternoon, by which time the heat was at its absolute peak, and the truck's radiator was being temperamental, and the nearest shade was a single mesquite tree that was doing its honest best. They sat under the mesquite and ate the sandwiches Eli had brought and drank water and didn't talk much because the heat made conversation expensive. The land around them was vast and still, shimmering at the horizon, impossibly quiet except for the insects. Eli had his hat tipped down over his face and was deciding whether to be bothered to fix the fence now or come back in the morning when the temperature was sane. He fell asleep. He woke up to find himself slightly slumped to the right, his shoulder against Noah's, and Noah's head dropped onto his shoulder, and both of them still and warm in the shade while the insects made their small, persistent sounds. He didn't move. He stayed exactly where he was and felt the solid, specific warmth of Noah against his side and the deep, bone-level comfort of it, and looked up through the mesquite branches at the white-hot sky and thought, yes, this is exactly it. This is the thing that has no name because the names that exist for it are all too small. Noah woke up about 10 minutes later. Eli felt the shift of his breathing, the small adjustment that was the return of consciousness, and then the stillness that followed as Noah presumably oriented himself and registered where he was and what position they were in. He didn't move either. For another minute, maybe two, they sat there under the mesquite with the heat pressed in around them and Noah's head on Eli's shoulder, and neither of them moved or spoke. Eli's heart was doing something that was less like the panicked thing it sometimes did and more like a very full, very slow beat, the pulse of something large and steady. Then Noah lifted his head and Eli straightened, and they both looked straight ahead at the shimmering horizon. "Fence isn't going to fix itself," Noah said. "No," Eli agreed. "Want to come back tomorrow morning?" "Yeah." A pause. "That makes more sense." "Cool." They drove home. The truck's radiator held. The sky went enormous and pink and then purple and then full dark by the time they turned into the ranch drive, and Eli parked and they got out and walked to the house and started dinner, and everything was ordinary and everything was completely different. The trouble started on a Friday in late July. It started with a phone call. Eli was in the kitchen when his phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize, Texas area code. He answered with the automatic wariness of a ranch owner who has learned that unexpected calls usually mean unexpected problems. It was a woman named Carol Brandt. She introduced herself as a representative of a land development company out of Dallas. Her voice had the specific texture of someone who was used to delivering information that people didn't want to receive and who had made a professional virtue of their ability to do it calmly. She had a proposal, she said, an offer for Callaway Creek. She named a number. Eli sat down at the kitchen table. The number was not a small number. It was the kind of number that represented a solution to a set of problems that Eli had not told anyone about because he was not a person who told people about problems, not until they were either resolved or very unavoidable. The debt his father had left, which had been manageable when Eli had taken over and had become, over the past 14 months of single-handed operation and one bad season and a truck repair that had cost more than it should have, something other than manageable. The property tax assessment that was coming due. The winter feed costs that were due to come in at a number that he'd been trying not to look at directly. He told Carol Brandt he needed time to think about it. He sat at the kitchen table after he hung up and looked at the wall for a long time. When Noah came in from the barn, he stopped in the kitchen doorway in the way he'd learned to stop, reading the room before entering it, another old habit. He looked at Eli. Eli looked at the wall. "What happened?" Noah said. "Nothing." A pause, and then the pause was too long and the word was too flat, and he heard both of those things and knew Noah heard them too. "Someone wants to buy the ranch." A silence. "Are you going to?" Noah asked. His voice was very careful. Eli turned and looked at him for the first time since he'd come in. Noah was leaning in the doorway, arms at his sides, not the crossed arms posture of distance, but something more open, more uncertain. He looked, Eli realized, scared. It hit Eli somewhere he wasn't expecting. "I don't know," he said, which was the only honest answer. Noah nodded, said nothing, went to the sink and washed his hands with the slow deliberation of someone who is doing a thing to have something to do with themselves. They had dinner. It was the quietest dinner they'd had in weeks, the silence a different quality than their usual comfortable quiet, heavier, textured with things unsaid. Noah ate and did his share of the cleaning up and then went to sit on the porch in the cooling dark. Eli joined him after a while. "If you sell," Noah said without preamble, "where do you go?" "I don't know." "What do you want?" Eli looked out at the dark pasture, the pale shape of cattle moving in the distance, the stars doing their thing overhead. "I want to keep it," he said. "I want to make it work." A pause. "I just don't know if I can." Noah was quiet for a moment, then, "Tell me what you need." Eli turned to look at him. Noah was looking at him steadily, with that direct, assessing quality that had been one of the first things Eli had noticed about him back on that bruise-colored morning in February. "What?" "The ranch, what would it take to make it work, specifically?" He paused. "I'm not asking to fix it, I'm asking so I know what we're looking at." Eli heard the "we," he let it sit there for a second. Then he told Noah. The numbers, the specific shortfalls, the assessments and debts and the winter forecast, all of it, the real picture, the one he hadn't given anyone because he hadn't wanted to seem like he was asking for help or sympathy or anything he hadn't earned. He laid it out the way he would have laid it out for his father if his father were still here to give it to. Noah listened. He asked questions, precise, practical questions that showed he understood what he was hearing. Then he was quiet for a while. "I have money saved," he said, "not a lot but some." Eli started to say no. He had the word ready before the sentence was finished. "Before you say no," Noah said, "just hear me out." He turned in his chair to face him and his expression was serious and direct, and something else, something underneath the seriousness that Eli could feel like heat from a distant fire. "I have been moving my whole life. I've been working and saving and spending and moving and starting over, and I have nothing to show for it except a number in a savings account and a set of skills and a list of places I've been that don't mean much when you're lying awake at 2 in the morning." He stopped, took a breath. "This place means something, to you." A pause and then quieter, more careful, "To me." Eli was very still. "I'm not offering charity," Noah said. "I'm offering to be in this if you want that." A beat. "If you want me in this." The night was warm and the stars were out, and somewhere in the pasture one of the cattle made a low, unconcerned sound. Eli looked at Noah's profile, the line of his jaw, the steadiness of his dark eyes, and felt something enormous and old and deeply rooted move through him. "Noah," he said, "you don't have to decide anything tonight." Noah stopped, turned back. Eli held his gaze. "I want you in this." The air between them changed. It was not a subtle change. Noah's expression did something complicated, several things at once, all of them moving quickly across his features and then settling into something that was the face of a person who has been bracing for impact for so long that not being hit feels disorienting. "Okay," he said, soft, barely there. "Okay," Eli said. They sat in the warm dark for a long time after that. They didn't touch, not yet, not that night, but the space between their chairs, which had always been exactly 2 feet of Texas night air, felt different now. Full, like something that had been absent was present in it. Eli didn't sell the ranch. August came and went in a blaze that Eli moved through like a man who has learned to be patient with heat. The situation with the ranch finances began, slowly and with a great deal of effort and careful accounting, and one very long conversation with a banker in town who turned out to be a decent man, to look less like a wall and more like a problem with specific solutions. Some of Noah's money came into the equation, structured as a proper formal arrangement that Eli had insisted on, with paperwork and terms and a repayment schedule, because he was not going to take someone's savings without treating it with the seriousness it deserved. Noah had agreed to the terms with the patient, slightly amused expression he sometimes wore when Eli got formally thorough about something. "You're the most honest person I've ever met," he said, signing the papers. "I'm just careful," Eli said. "That's what I mean." The dynamic between them had changed, had been changing since that night on the porch, incrementally, like a tide coming in so slowly you don't see the individual advances. They were closer now in all the ways that word applied. The physical space they moved in together had contracted. There was no longer any deliberate distance being maintained, and the moments of proximity that had previously charged the air with something unspoken now had a different quality, warmer, less tense, more like the ease of two people who have said, in whatever language they're comfortable with, what they mean to each other. But there was still a last thing, one last step that neither of them had taken. Eli was aware of it the way you're aware of a specific landmark when you're navigating familiar territory. He could feel the shape of it, the weight of it. He thought sometimes that Noah was aware of it too, could tell by the particular quality of certain moments, the careful, deliberate quality with which they were sometimes navigated. An evening in September, when the heat had finally started to relent, and the sky was going back to the deep, clear blue of early fall, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, and Noah was talking about something Eli had stopped tracking because he had become distracted by the way the evening light was doing something specific to the left side of Noah's face, the way it emphasized the line of his jaw and the shadow of his lashes, and Noah must have noticed the distraction because he stopped talking mid-sentence. "What?" Noah said. "Nothing," Eli said. "Sorry, keep going." Noah looked at him with those careful dark eyes for a moment. "You weren't listening." "I was looking." A silence. Noah's expression was very still. "Oh," he said. Eli held his gaze deliberately without looking away because he had decided some time ago that if a moment came he was going to be present in it. Noah looked at him for a long-held moment, then he looked down at his glass, then he looked back up. A slow smile started, not the rare, surprised one, but something quieter and more deliberate, something that had chosen to be there. "You're going to make me wait for it, aren't you?" he said, not a question. "I'm thorough," Eli said. Noah's smile deepened. "You're going to make me ask." "I'm careful." Eli, just his name, quiet and direct, with everything in it that Noah had been keeping for months in the careful architecture of his silences. Eli set down his glass. "Yeah," he said. "It happened simply, the way the best things do." It was a Sunday morning in late September in the kitchen, very ordinary. Coffee made, eggs on the stove, the particular quality of Sunday morning light falling through the kitchen windows onto the floor. Noah was at the counter, back to the room, doing something with the coffee, and Eli came in from the porch where he'd been watching the horses in the morning fog and stopped behind him. "Noah." He turned, and Eli closed the distance. It was not a dramatic thing. It was the thing that had been building since February, since a dark, cold morning and a stranger propped against a fence post, and the first time those dark eyes had assessed him and decided after consideration to trust. It was slow and certain and entirely mutual, and it was warm the way the ranch was warm in the morning, with the specific warmth of something solid and real. Afterward, Noah stood with his back to the counter and Eli's forehead against his, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Noah's hands were in the front of Eli's jacket, just holding, and Eli had his hands on either side of Noah against the counter edge, and the coffee was getting cold. "There it is," Noah said finally. "Yeah," Eli said. "I thought you were going to make me wait until winter." "I'm thorough, not cruel." Noah laughed, the real one, the surprised one, the one that rearranged his face and put light in his eyes, and Eli thought, standing in his kitchen in the September morning with this man laughing against his shoulder, that this was the specific shape of what he had been building toward. This ordinary, extraordinary Sunday. This person. This sound. Outside, Ranger made some loud, self-important noise in the paddock that broke the moment open into practicality, and they both turned to look at the window, and then at each other, and there was something in the looking, the shared, lit, warm quality of it that said, "We will be looking at each other like this for a long time." "Breakfast," Eli said. "On it," Noah said and turned back to the stove. October on a Texas ranch has a quality unlike any other month, a cooling clarity, the sky going deeper blue, the grass going amber, the mornings finally releasing the summer's heat and allowing you to breathe all the way to the bottom of your lungs again. Eli loved October the way he loved all the specific things about this land that had claimed him from birth, with a love that was not about choice but about nature. He loved this October specifically. Things were different in the specific ways that mattered and unchanged in all the ways that made them good. They still woke early and made coffee and ate breakfast. Noah still made better eggs and worked the ranch through the morning and rested through the midday and went back out in the afternoon. The work was the same work it had always been. Physical, demanding, purposeful, the kind that earns its own silence at the end of the day. But the evenings were fuller. And the mornings had something in them that Eli had not had in a ranch morning in 14 months. Another person fully present in them. Not functionally present, not practically present, but present in the way that matters, attentive, real, choosing to be there. Noah had, sometime in October, stopped talking about South, or somewhere else, or any of the various vague future destinations he'd carried with him since February. Not in a dramatic way, he hadn't made a speech about it, hadn't given Eli a formal announcement. It had just stopped being part of his vocabulary. His future tense, when it appeared, had started to be populated by specifics. The fence line in the north pasture that would need attention in the spring, the plan for the additional cattle they were considering buying, the truck, which they were going to fix properly before winter rather than continuing to patch it. "You're making plans," Eli said one evening. Noah looked up from the notepad where he'd been working out some numbers. "So are you." "I've always made plans, I live here." "Right," Noah held his gaze steady and warm, "so do I." Eli absorbed this, put it in the place where it belonged, which was somewhere deep and permanent. "Right," he said. There were adjustments. Noah was not a perfect fit for every contour of the life Eli had been living. He was more restless than Eli in some ways, needed occasional expanses of silence that were specifically alone, which Eli understood and accommodated by making himself comfortable with the idea that two people could be in the same place and also alone. He was sometimes difficult to reach when something was bothering him, defaulting to that old contained private habit of keeping things inside, and Eli had developed the skill of sitting with him in those silences without pushing, which was an act of patience that he'd learned from his father and was now grateful for. For his part, Eli's own silences were harder for him to break than they used to be, a fact that Noah would sometimes look at directly and comment on in his flat, unambiguous way. "You're doing the thing where you're working something out by yourself instead of out loud." And Eli would say yeah, and make himself work it out loud, which was harder and usually more useful. They were, as it turned out, good at the things the other person needed. Not perfect, not effortless, but genuinely good in the way that things are good when two people care enough to make them so. November brought the first cold, and with it a particular kind of gratitude for the ranch house, for the stone walls that held the warmth, for the fireplace that Eli's grandfather had built and that still drew beautifully, for the old blankets on the couch. They spent evenings by the fire with the record player going low and the horses settled in their stalls outside and the cattle in the near pasture, and the land outside going dark and cold and quiet. One evening Noah was reading, stretched out on the couch with his feet up, and Eli was doing the accounts at the kitchen table. A task he'd learned to approach with much less dread now that the numbers were telling a better story, and the fire crackled and the record reached its end and the needle went around in the quiet groove and neither of them got up to flip it. Eli finished his accounting, closed the ledger and came to sit in the chair by the fire. He looked at Noah for a moment, the ease of him, the familiarity of this, the way the firelight moved across the planes of his face with a warmth that made something in Eli settle down to its deepest register. Noah, without looking up from the book. I'm glad you fell off that truck. Noah lowered the book, looked at him. His expression was the soft one, the one that had no armor in it, that Eli knew was one of the rarest things he'd been given in this life. Yeah, he said. Yeah. A pause, the fire crackled. Me too, Noah said, quiet, complete. He raised the book again. Eli looked at the fire. The needle went around in its groove. Outside, the land was cold and dark and vast, and in here the light was warm and the sound of the needle in the groove was the most perfect sound in the world. There is a question that runs underneath the whole story of Eli Calloway and Noah West, a question that started on a cold February morning and ran through every meal and every fence line and every evening on the porch and every moment of proximity and every slow increment of trust and eventually reached, on a November night by a fire, something like an answer. The question was, what does a person need to stop running? Not what they need to have, not security or stability or comfort in the material sense, though those things matter and are real, but something more specific, more personal, something that has to do with the internal structure of the self and what it's built around. Noah had spent years believing that what he needed was the next place, the next job, the next landscape, the next iteration of himself in a different context. He had moved so consistently and so deliberately that the moving had started to feel like the point, rather than a means to something. He had, in the language of his own private understanding, confused momentum with direction. What he found at Calloway Creek, what crept up on him so slowly and so completely that by the time he recognized it for what it had already changed the whole geography of his life, was not a place. It was a person who was also a place. Eli, who had the specific quality of someone who has grown into themselves fully, and who therefore gives off a sense of permanence not because he never moved, but because he was always, wherever he was, fully himself. Being around Eli was like the ground stopping moving under your feet. For Noah, who had spent years on shifting ground, this was not a small thing. For Eli, who had spent 14 months in the silence of solo responsibility and grief and the particular loneliness of being the last person in a house that had been built for more, Noah was the specific answer to a question he hadn't known he'd been asking. Not just help with the work, not just a warm presence in the rooms, but someone who looked at the land and the life and saw its value and chose it, who chose him. Choosing is the thing, not arriving at something by accident or necessity, but making the choice to stay, to return, to be present with full knowledge of the cost and the difficulty and all the unglamorous ordinary Tuesdays that go into a life. Noah had chosen. Eli had learned finally to let himself be chosen. December came in cold and clear, and with it the ranch's specific winter work, the checking and the feeding and the watching and the preparation for storms that might come or might not. They were both good at winter work, both people who moved efficiently through cold, and the days had a brisk, purposeful quality that Eli had always privately loved about this season. On a December Saturday, they drove to town for supplies. It was the first time Noah had come to town with Eli rather than staying behind, and Eli noticed the shift without commenting on it. He drove, and Noah rode in the passenger seat with his elbow on the window sill and watched the road with the comfortable, unguarded attention of someone who feels no need to be on alert. In town, Eli introduced him to people: the banker, Mr. Calloway's old friend at the hardware store, Carol at the diner who had known Eli since he was 5 and showed her approval of Noah in the form of larger portions and pointed questions about his plans. Staying on the Calloway ranch, she said, topping off their coffee. Yes, ma'am, Noah said. For how long? A pause. Noah looked at Eli across the table and Eli looked back, and something passed between them that had the quality of a private conversation conducted in about half a second. Long as he'll have me, Noah said. Carol's expression suggested this was the correct answer, and she moved on. They drove home in the December dark with the truck full of supplies and the heater on and the radio playing something low and country, the way it always did, and Noah had his head tipped back on the headrest and was looking up at the stars through the windshield with an expression that Eli, from the corner of his eye, recognized as something he'd been seeing more of lately. Contentment. Just that simple and enormous. What are you thinking? Eli asked. Noah turned his head to look at him, The dashboard light caught the curve of his smile. "That I've been a lot of places," he said, "and this is the only one that ever felt like mine." Eli watched the road, his hands were steady on the wheel. "It is yours," he said. Noah turned back to the windshield. The stars were extravagant above them. The truck ran steady, the brake lines finally and properly fixed, carrying them home through the Texas dark. Epilogue: What grows in the silence between two people. It is now February again. 1 year since a stubborn horse planted his feet in the pre-dawn dark and refused to move. 1 year since Eli crouched next to a stranger propped against a fence post and handed him a canteen. 1 year since those dark eyes looked up through the half-light and assessed him with the wary, intelligent attention that had not stopped, since that moment, being one of Eli's favorite things to be on the receiving end of. The land is cold again, the way it was. The sky is doing its winter thing, going enormous and clear and blue-black at night with that absolute excess of stars. The mornings are still dark when Eli rides out to check the cattle, and Ranger still has opinions, and the fence lines still need minding, and there is still more work than one person can reasonably do. But there is not one person. There are two, moving through the land together in the practiced, unhurried rhythm of people who have learned each other, who know each other's working pace and morning moods and the sounds they make when they're thinking hard about something, and the specific silences that mean different things, and the way the other person takes their coffee, and what they sound like when they laugh in the dark on a cold porch while the stars do their impossible work overhead. On the morning of the anniversary, not a thing either of them said out loud, but a thing they both knew. Eli came back from his early ride to find Noah in the kitchen. Coffee made, eggs in the pan, morning light coming through the window at that particular angle it got in February, pale gold and new. Noah looked up when Eli came in, and smiled, the real one, the unguarded one, the one that had been coming out more easily all year, arriving more frequently and staying longer. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Eli said. He poured his coffee, he sat at the table. He looked out the window at the land, his land, their land, lying in the cold February morning like a piece of work that was done and done right all the way to the horizon. And the thought that moved through him, quiet and complete and without any need to be said out loud. "I found you at my fence line in the dark. And you found your way home." That's where their story is right now, two people and a ranch and a year of everything that matters, still building something that doesn't need to rush because it's already, quietly, unmistakably, real. And the question I want to leave you with is this. Noah still keeps at the bottom of his jacket pocket a small, smooth river stone he picked up from the dry creek bed at Callaway Creek on his first week there. He's never mentioned it. Eli has never seen it. But one evening, when Noah thinks Eli is asleep, he takes it out and looks at it in the lamplight. Why? What does it mean to carry a piece of a place before you know it's yours?
The end. If this story moved you, if you felt something in the silence, in the slow burn, in the patience of two people learning to trust each other, then this channel is built exactly for you. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story. Drop a like if Eli and Noah found their way to your heart. And leave a comment below. I genuinely want to know. Were you rooting for them for the barn scene or the kitchen scene? Thanks for watching and keep watching.